Thank you for joining us. I'm incredibly excited to be joined by Will Macaskill here for a Q&A session. Will is an associate professor of philosophy at Oxford. When he joined the faculty of Oxford University at age 28, he was the youngest associate professor of philosophy in the world. His research focuses on decision-making under moral uncertainty, as well as effective altruism, the use of evidence and reason to promote the well-being of all. Will is the co-founder of 3 nonprofits based on effective altruist principles: Giving What We Can, 80,000 Hours, and the Center for Effective Altruism. These organizations have collectively raised over $15 million for effective charities, with a further $700 million in lifetime pledged donations, and sparked the effective altruism movement, with thousands of members and over 100 local groups around the world. He has also written the books Doing Good Better and Moral Uncertainty, and is a research fellow at the Global Priorities Institute. My name is Sella, and I'll be hosting Will in this Q&A alongside Dan.
Hi all, my name is Dan Lahav. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be asking Will your questions. We've already collected some questions, but you're still welcome to ask more questions through the link. It's still not too late to submit your questions, which you can do using the links we've shared on Facebook and on Discord. Will, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
I'd like to start us off with the following question. So what is the thing most people get wrong about effective altruism?
Yeah, it's a great question. So effective altruism at its core is the project of trying to figure out how we can use our time and money as effectively as possible to make the world a better place, and then taking action on that basis. And often it's the case that people conflate this with a moral view called consequentialism or utilitarianism, where consequentialism says you ought always to do whatever will maximize the best consequences. Utilitarianism says that's consequentialism is true, and plus also what best consequences mean are, the greatest happiness over unhappiness, or sum total of well-being. And effective altruism is a much broader tent than that in 2 ways. Firstly, we're not claiming necessarily that you ought always to maximize the good. There's rife disagreement within effective altruism about how extreme our obligations are. Some people think, yes, no, you really should give away almost all of your income. You should be trying to dedicate your life to helping others because the problems in the world are so extreme. Other people don't see it like that and instead think, no, this is just an opportunity that's available to us. And as part of living up to my values and having a fulfilling, authentic life, I want to dedicate part of my life to helping others as much as I can. A second way in which effective altruism is much broader than utilitarianism is with respect to ends justify the means reasoning, where on utilitarianism or consequentialism, if you can harm one person in order to benefit 5 people by more, then you are required to do so. So if you can kill one person to save 5, you ought morally to do so. Whereas effective altruism has nothing to say on that. And in particular, leading effective altruist figures like myself strongly encourage against that sort of ends justify the means reasoning. I think it's a big mistake. And then the third aspect is in what the good consists of, where we tend to focus on promoting well-being because we think that's the best way at the moment of improving the world, making the world a better place. But many people within effective altruism are also sympathetic to the idea that the natural environment flourishing, or art, knowledge, accomplishment, justice are intrinsic values as well. And so that's the most important distinction, is just a very wide array of moral views, I think, should converge on this idea that we should be trying our best to work out how we can make the world better as well as we can, and we should be trying to do so.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's a very common misconception. I think.
Yeah.
I think some of the people watching, I assume, have been following effective altruism for quite a few years. One of the questions we have here are, what new projects are you most excited about these days?
Yeah, it's again a good question. So I think in terms of a project, the Global Priorities Institute, which I helped to set up and am part of, is what's kind of occupying most of my attention at the moment, as well as the book I'm writing. And I'm really excited about that because there are so many fundamental questions that effective altruism raises. So how should we compare the welfare of humans against non-human animals? How should we think about impacts that will occur over the course of many centuries or millennia, or instead, have benefits to the present generation? Like, how should we weigh up lower probabilities of larger amounts of impact against kind of a certainty of doing good? And that's only some. And for years, we knew that these were really important questions and had done some work on it, but just limited by resources in terms of how deep we could go. Whereas now we're really managing to gather together some of the best moral philosophers and economists in the world to try to tackle these questions. And I think we have a real shot at leveraging the brain power of academia to make progress on these questions that are just so fundamental for the question of what we ought to be prioritizing. I guess being a bit of a nerd myself, it's something that I find, particularly exciting from a personal perspective.
Thank you for the answer. You gave an interview in which you said that there were 6 very good arguments for utilitarianism as a basis of morality. Unfortunately, the interviewer didn't actually let you finish and say what they all were. Would you mind sharing with the audience what you think they are? Obviously, you don't have to go in depth to all of them, or just just name them, or just to some of them. Yeah. Okay,
terrific. I'll try and remember. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to bring together all 6 or what exactly I was thinking of. So like I say, effective altruism is much broader than utilitarianism, but I do think that the case for utilitarianism is stronger than many moral philosophers think. And so here's a few arguments. So one is just the track record of utilitarianism. So think of moral views like scientific theories making predictions, where we can look back a couple of hundred years and look at who are the leading proponents of different moral views, and what were the particular moral claims that they really staked their staked their claims on. And how does that look now from the perspective of 200 years of moral progress? And if we look at the utilitarians, Bentham and Mill, they thought that homosexuality should be decriminalized. They were in favor of liberalism. They were in favor of rights for women, even showed concern for non-human animals too. So in generally what we would, not perfect by any means, they were still a product of their time, but they generally seem to be very progressive relative to the morality of their time. Contrast that with Kant, who thought there was a hierarchy of races, thought that women had no place in civil society, thought that masturbation was impermissible, as was selling or removing or even donating any of your organs or even a lock of hair. Thought that suicide was immoral too. So it looks, that's obviously the merest sketch of an argument, needs more work, but it seems like this utilitarian lens has been remarkably powerful at driving having kind of moral foresight. And if we think that's been true in the past, then I think that gives us evidence for thinking it could be true today. So that's one argument. Number 2, it's going to take a while to get through all 6. Number 2 is, imagine if you're making a decision behind a veil of ignorance. So you don't know who you're going to be in society, but you do know how likely it is you're going to be anyone. And you're making decisions self-instantly. So you want to you have the option of structuring society so that you personally have the best chance of having the best life you can and avoiding suffering and avoiding a bad life. Well, given that setup, it turns out that the way you would structure society is such that assuming you can't vary how many people there are, total well-being is maximized. That is, you would choose the utilitarian distribution. Now, this thought experiment came from the economists Vickrey and Harsanyi, and then was later popularized by John Rawls, who used it to derive a different principle. But I think his setup is extremely tendentious, and the implications of the principle, of his difference principle, are much more implausible. I don't need to go into that, though. A third is a second theorem from John Harsanyi, which is that if all individuals in society have preferences, or their good, their personal good, their well-being satisfies certain axioms of rationality, and the moral theory that you endorse also satisfies those axioms of rationality, and these are, in my view, pretty uncontroversial, And it's the case that you endorse a principle that says, if one outcome is better for some people and not worse for anyone, equally and good for everyone else, then that outcome is better. So, for example, if it's something that benefits Sella and is indifferent to Dan, then it's good for that thing to happen. If you endorse all that, then again, you get utilitarianism as a model view. So that was number 3. That was number 3. Number 4 appeals to a non-identity, no self view of personal identity, I should say. So if you have a moral view that there's nothing fundamental moral importance about being a person. So this is true in the Buddhist tradition, also from recent work by Derek Parfit, which is essentially we're just this kind of bundle of experiences. There's no kind of distinctive ego on top of that. Then it's the case that the trade-offs, there's nothing of fundamental moral difference between me now and me age 70 and me now and you now, let's say. Maybe there's a difference degree, but nothing fundamental. In which case, then, it seems like morally, the trade-offs I ought to make between me now and me age 70 and me now and you now should be, at least at the fundamental level, the same. And once you're saying that the same trade-offs you make within a life are the trade-offs you make across lives, well, that's basically just utilitarianism again, or at least a slightly broader class of views than utilitarianism. And then number 5 would be just the balancing of intuitions with simplicity of theory. So if you look at the theoretical virtues that a theory has, utilitarianism, it's very simple, it's very elegant, it has great explanatory power. So in just the same way that Newton's theory of gravity was so powerful because it could explain why an apple falls to Earth and why the moon revolves around the Earth. That's like 2 radically different phenomena explained by the same thing. Similarly, utilitarianism, I think, is able to explain many phenomena, like why we think knowledge is important, why we think equality is important, all sorts of different harms that we think people have a right to avoid. It can explain all of that with respect to one view. And that, combined with the fact that we should think of our intuitions as being at least only of moderate reliability, mean that I think utilitarianism gets very well supported by what philosophers call a principle of reflective equilibrium, where you're going back and forth between theoretical elegance of a view and particular claims. Okay, and then number 6, I'm not sure if this is actually what I was thinking, but I think there's a pragmatic argument for at least acting significantly more like utilitarianism thinks than other views, which is just that things are much higher stakes from utilitarianism. In particular, with respect to the actions we could take that might have a negative impact for the indefinite future, because the long-term future is absolutely vast in size. There are plausibly hundreds of trillions, maybe trillions upon trillions of people yet to come. And I think there are things that we could do over the course of our lifetimes, such as reducing the risk of human extinction or ensuring that any potential lock-ins of values go well. Those could have impacts over that entire kind of future population. And that's like very, very high stakes. And so if what you're doing is taking into account uncertainty over different theories, so it's not that you're completely wedded to one theory, but you have a degree of belief in many, and you're taking a judgment that represents the best compromise between them, then you'll end up doing fairly similar things to what a classical utilitarian would say. It's not exactly the same, but fairly similar. I think I could probably keep going, but you asked for 6, and so there we go.
I hope all the debaters participating in the Effective Altruism Debating Championship have listed all of these down. They may come in useful. On a related note, I think much of our audience here are debaters, and many debaters find themselves in careers in consulting or public service or politics. Do you have any recommendations that you would give to someone on these paths who wants to make a large positive impact on the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have potential for enormous amounts of influence here. I think, governments control, a very significant proportion of resources in the world. There's also just certain things they can do via legislation that just aren't possible otherwise. the biggest question is just the choice of what cause you focus on. So, there's an enormous array of things, of course, you can do within public service or government. And these vary massively in terms of your potential to have an impact. Where the areas that I think are most influential and important at the moment are those that might impact the long-run future. So climate change is the most familiar of these, but also pandemics is now sadly getting more attention, but that's very important. The ability for us to design new pathogens could bring about, truly global catastrophe. And then developments in artificial intelligence, I think, are also extremely important. I think that gives the potential for the future of civilization to get locked into certain paths that may be more or less desirable. And I think that focusing on these, they're very neglected at the moment. You can much more quickly than in other areas rise to a position where you're one of the most expert people in the world, because they're much more new, much more neglected. Because they're neglected and not yet politicized, there's more potential to actually move the debate. And then the importance of them is just unparalleled. And so perhaps kind of general lesson for this. So in my book, I talk about this idea of early plasticity, later rigidity. So if you're thinking about climate change, we really had the first understanding of the seriousness of climate change. You can see documentaries in 1956 by Frank Capra talking about the damages of climate change. And if we'd been taking action as governments, in the 60s and 70s, we could have just avoided this as a problem, in very significant extent. And that's because when an issue is just new, there's not yet entrenched political debate or kind of political partisanship around it, and you can really move the needle. And I think that's what we will see with these emerging technologies like synthetic biology, like artificial intelligence. And that gives us an unusual ability to have influence over what I think is, what are going to be some of the most important issues of our lifetime.
On a semi-related note to the uncertainty, do you do any work with or donate any money to non-EA causes? For example, charities that aren't able to document and prove their impact to the extent that GiveWell stipulates, but that you do think that will do or are already doing a lot of good?
So I'll answer that in two ways. With my time, I, occasionally at least do things that perhaps from one perspective would not pass the benefit cost test. I remember once living in Oakland, and a woman, came up to me and asked if I could help her out. I was just on a run at lunchtime, and I thought she was going to ask to, want some groceries moved or something. She actually wanted this massive couch moved all the way down the street, and it took me kind of 2 hours. I got to know her family and things. That was during the workday as well. So some people were a bit annoyed that I just lost 2 hours of work doing this. But I don't really feel very bad about that. I think it's kind of good to stay in touch with, at least just, stay in touch with, people in your nearby surroundings who need help and who you can benefit at low cost to yourself. Then with my money, when I'm giving charitably, I do give to the things that I think will do the most good. It is not the case, though, that I'm only donating to areas that I think can kind of document and prove their impact to the level that GiveWell stipulates, where I think many of the very best opportunities for doing good are those areas that are actually just higher risk, higher upside. So one organization I'll mention, which I've supported in the past, is the Center for Election Science, which is promoting voting reform. So we currently use first past the post in the US. So you just vote for one candidate. You get basically the smallest amount of information you can from voters. And it has incredibly bad properties. So vote splitting is a major issue. Say you've got 2 Democrats and 1 Republican for a particular sort of election, a mayoral election, and 60% of people are Democrats and 40% of people are Republicans. Well, a Republican candidate can win because 30% of the vote goes to each of the Democrats and the Republican gets the most votes. Similarly, it means that voting flips between the leftmost 50% and the rightmost 50% of the populace. In contrast to approval voting, you can just vote for as many candidates as you like. So it's incredibly simple as a change, but has radically better properties. Doesn't allow vote splitting in the same way. It's much better at satisfying the will of the people. And they have had some traction. So Fargo, North Dakota, now uses approval voting for the city elections, and are expecting to do more. And this is, they're running for St. Louis for next month, and have plans for other organizations too. This is also, I should say, an organization I think debaters could be perhaps particularly well suited to benefit. So partly that's why I'm bringing it up. But can obviously you can't have the same level of rigor about an intervention like this than you can about bed net distribution, let's say. But you can still make a case about why it's very important. Is having better democratic institutions important? Yes. Here's all of this both theoretical mathematical arguments and simulations about why this voting system is much better than another. Do we think we can get traction? Well, we've already had some amount of traction with funding. We can create a rough kind of estimate of how widespread they could be with a given amount of money. And I think that's just quite a systematic thing, that there's many very exciting organizations that I think are doing enormous amounts of good, where just in the nature of what they're doing, you can't have the same level of rigor that public health charities can have.
Awesome. We don't have much time left. I want to sneak in maybe another philosophy question that we've received. So the next question is, if totalist theories of population ethics are true, which are theories where we kind of care about the aggregate, we sum up the utility of different people rather than averaging them out or things like that. What does that mean for policies that would reduce fertility, like accessible family planning, legalizing abortion, investing in social security for the elderly, and so on? Might they be bad things by preventing potential lives from coming into existence?
Okay, great. Yes, I have two questions. So totalist population views, for those who don't know, say that it's a good thing if someone will have a life that's worth living, a life that has more good than bad in it, such that they would think, I'm happy to be born. That's a good thing to do. And similarly, if there's someone who comes into existence and has a bad life, such that they think, no, there's more misery than happiness in my life, that's a bad thing to do. And so the totalist view says it's therefore good to have more people if those people would live flourishing lives. And now, crucially, the main implication of this, and main by far and away, is not to do with the level of population right now. It's to do with the level of population across all time. And in the future, there might be vastly larger numbers of people than there are today. The Earth could remain habitable for 1 billion years. Last stars die out in 1 trillion years' time. Civilization could be very big in the future. And we have a risk of losing that. We have a risk of causing other untimely extinction via nuclear war, synthetic biology, or something like that. And so the real upshot there is to make sure that we are able to continue into the future and have a flourishing civilization. And that should be by far and away the number one thing. The second point, though, is that I do think that there's actually multiple reasons why having more people right now is a good thing. And so when one can do so, especially for countries like the US, when one can do so in a way consistent with liberal principles, so perhaps that's better childcare, better kind of benefits for parents and so on, it's actually good to incentivize increased fertility, people having more kids. Partly it's people want more kids, partly it's good for those people to be in existence, but also because the long-term driver of progress, which is responsible for the remarkable increase in living standards over time, comes from having more people. It comes from those people innovating, having ideas. And the more people you have, you get increasing returns, you get kind of benefits to scale. And even though there are costs to having people too, obviously the negative impact on the climate and so on, I think the benefits from increased innovation outweigh quite significantly the costs too. But like I say, that's all of secondary importance, I think, to the importance of just ensuring that the human race actually continues into the future.
Thank you for this answer. We have tons more questions, but unfortunately we don't have much more time. So perhaps the best way to wrap this up would be to ask you, because we have an audience of debaters, what would you like to see more debate on within the effective altruism community?
Oh, terrific. Right now I'm thinking a lot about the value of the future. So in particular, people often say it's kind of good or, sometimes there's debate, is it good or is it bad? And I think there's really good arguments for thinking the future is going to be good on balance. But there's still a question just how good? Is it going to be should we expect future civilization just to converge on the right thing and then build a kind of utopian society? Or should we think it's more like civilization today, which is a very mixed bag? Lots of joy, but also lots of suffering. And that's in particular very important for this question of, should we focus on extinction risks, like risk from synthetic biology, nuclear war, or should we focus instead on things that would lock in civilization and particular sets of values, like artificial intelligence, or perhaps possibility of a world government, where the less optimistic you are about the future, the more inclined you're going to be to try and make the future good conditional on survival than you will be to just ensure that the future happens at all. And so that's really on my mind at the moment, and more debate on that would be fantastic.
Amazing. Will, I'd like to thank you for setting the time to speak to us and to the debating community more broadly. It really is a pleasure and an honor to hear your views on these important questions. If there's anything else you think we should have asked you or you want to tell this audience, we'd love to hear. If not, really, thank you so much.
Yeah, I thought those questions were excellent. Very high level. Obviously, people here are really engaged and really thoughtful. So I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Excellent.
Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, thanks. Cool. I'll sign off.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.